students and professors against anti-Semitic incidents that they have been facing. December is Shine a Light Month, and we're delighted to be working together with Shine a Light to bring attention to anti-Semitism, including in the workplace, which is an area that we have been looking at recently, in part because every college is also a workplace. That is to say, for professors, for administrators, and staff people, the things that are happening on the quad that may have a negative effect on Jewish students may have a negative effect on them as well. A few years ago, when we first started during the month of December looking at corporate and workplace issues, it occurred to us that this really wasn't entirely new to us, and not only because the campus is a workplace for so many people. We realized that from time to time, employees have reached out to us to say that they are facing some form of discrimination or harassment in their place of work. We also realized that as we were addressing anti-Semitic efforts to boycott, divest from, or sanction the state of Israel, this might have started in colleges, but then migrated into academic associations, but then we had to fight it in the corporate sphere as well, in our case against Ben & Jerry's. Similarly, we realized that when we thought about it, our work on ESG, that is to say, addressing extreme anti-Zionism in some programs dealing with environmental, social, and governance ratings of corporate securities, that too is in the corporate sphere. And then beyond that was the question of DEI, which has arisen for us in lots of different respects. To begin with, it is sometimes potentially a solution, which is to say, the anti-discrimination section of colleges or corporations are sometimes the go-to for clients who are concerned about discrimination that they face as Jewish Americans or otherwise. So it is sometimes intended to be a solution or part of the solution. And the remedies that we sometimes seek for discrimination may involve training, orientation, or other activities that are provided by DEI. But we also have tended to find a few problems with DEI over time, ironically, at precisely the location or address at the campus or corporation where we would expect to find help. And they can take various forms. First, there is the exclusion of Jews, Jewish identity, or anti-Semitism from some DEI programs, which may be based on the misperception that Jewish identity is merely religion and that DEI should only be for ethnic or racial groups. But it's not enough, we found, to cure that omission, which is to say to include Jewish identity or anti-Semitism within DEI, because there's also sometimes the problem that DEI officials may not be sufficiently attuned to this problem. And in fact, there is some research, especially in the college campus setting, suggesting that many DEI officials are disproportionately focused on Israel in a negative way. That is to say that the DEI officials, according to some survey data, have adopted anti-Israel views that cross the line into anti-Semitism, which means that the very people who should be addressing hate and bias may be of a mind to perpetuate it. And then third is the problem that DEI, at its worst, can be based on an ideology which is positively unhelpful for addressing these issues. It can be based on simplistic dichotomies between oppressor and oppressed, between white supremacists and BIPOC, between victims and victimizers. And when this sort of reductive reasoning is used, too often Jews are simply defined as the oppressor, regardless of the background of Jews or the families or identity or background of individual Jewish employees or students. The assumption can be made that Jews have privilege that should be owned and that they should appear in DEI only as persons with privilege and power. This can slip quite rapidly into stereotypical perceptions about Jewish power, privilege, or control. So in other words, the very institutions that are intended to support minorities like Jewish Americans can, in some cases, actually become a part of the problem. So that's why we have been dealing with the delicate issue that on the one hand, we support the basic values of equal protection, of diversity, of equality, and yet sometimes DEI can be a problem as opposed to a solution. I'm very pleased today that I'm joined by three extraordinary people. Commissioner Andrea Lucas of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has honored us before with her participation in our events. She is an expert on these issues, having practiced with Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher, a firm that partners with us in some other matters as well, including the so-called call hotline that we have for college students. And Andrea is now a sitting member of the EEOC. Aliza Lewin, sitting next to Andrea, is the president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center. She is also a founding partner of the law firm of Lewin and Lewin, and a former president of the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. Our colleague, Rory Lansman, is the Director of Corporate Initiatives and Senior Counsel at the Louis D. Brandeis Center. He is also a former elected member of the New York City Council and served as a New York State Assemblyman. He has also served in government official capacities in the state of New York, in the Cuomo and Hochul administrations. We are honored to have all three, and I hope that you will join me in welcoming first Commissioner Andrea Lucas.
Can everyone hear me okay? It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you so much to Chairwoman Fox for hosting this and for the Brandeis Center for organizing this important event on such a timely and important topic. Today I want to cover three main topics at a very high level. One, the current state of employment discrimination law as it relates to the EEOC's mission and the law's application to Jewish employees' rights. Two, the rise in anti-Semitism in the workplace. And three, the current state landscape of DEI, programs in corporate America, the law applicable to those programs, and my perspective on the connection to anti-Semitism. So first, the state of employment law. For those of you who aren't aware, just as a basic primer to bring up the speed on employment law, the EEOC is a federal agency that enforces federal civil anti-discrimination laws. That includes discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, and other protected bases. And among other civil rights laws that we enforce Title VII, which is another section of the Civil Rights Act, which also has Title VI in it, which many of you may be familiar with. Title VI covers education law, Title VII covers employment law. The federal employment discrimination law covers almost all workplaces. As a sidebar, I echo Ken's points that federal employment law applies to universities as well. Universities are not just educators, they're often large employers employing thousands to tens of thousands of faculty and staff. Turning back to the EEOC, I'm one of 5 commissioners, it's a bipartisan panel that lead the agency. And our mission is to prevent and remedy employment discrimination and advance equal opportunity employment for all. And note that I said equal employment opportunity. Our mission is to enforce that, not to impose equity. And our mission is to prevent and eliminate discrimination, not impose equitable outcomes. That's an important point that we'll get to when we talk more about DEI. Next, federal employment law clearly protects Jewish employees from anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination. That can arise in a variety of ways. It can include religion, but it doesn't only have to arise as a basis of religion. Discrimination and harassment that's unlawful could also be based on national origin or a perceived race or color. So anti-Semitic harassment or discrimination can fit under a variety of protected bases under Title VII. And it's important to note that Jewish employees can still challenge anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination at work that arises or impacts the workplace. There's no requirement for a level of religious observance or orthodoxy to be a victim of anti-Semitic discrimination or harassment in the workplace. And employers have an obligation to prevent and remedy this kind of discrimination. whether it occurs or impacts their workplace. And depending on the facts, the EEOC has taken the position, and federal case law generally agrees with this, that employers can be liable for conduct that occurs in a non-work related context, such as social media posts or conduct in a public square, if that conduct has consequences for the workplace and therefore contributes to a hostile work environment. The application to recent events post the October 7th terror attacks and what we've seen in the public square is clear here. That conduct can create a hostile work environment if it's impacting the workplace, which is quite easy in this day and age of widespread social media posting, people's general awareness of what's happening, media coverage of these types of events. And for at-will employees, it's important to note that employers have a right to fire or otherwise discipline employees for conduct that impacts the workplace in order to prevent a hostile work environment. Indeed, they may even be required to fire or discipline employees. Of course, any kind of discipline that's taken for anti-Semitic conduct outside of the workplace or inside of the workplace should always be done in an even-handed manner. You should not discipline one employee when you would not discipline them for similar or parallel conduct. But provided you're imposing discipline in a neutral manner without regards to race, national origin, or any other protected basis, it is important and necessary to take appropriate action, which could include discipline or termination, to prevent anti-Semitic harassment spilling over into the workplace, regardless of where that harassment may have occurred. So now turning to the state of anti-Semitic sentiment and conduct in the workplace. One of my main focuses at the agency has been on religious liberty, so I'm constantly surveying what the state of sentiment and spiking areas of discrimination, harassment, and even before the events of October 7th, we have been seeing a serious rise in anti-Semitic sentiment in the workplace based on some external data sources. In general, many Jewish organizations have noted severe rises in the reports of anti-Semitism across the board, nationally, from Brandeis to ADL to AJC. There's a variety of data sources out there. But in terms of specifically the workplace, we also have seen some indicators of that is happening as well. Last year, an organization called Resume Builder surveyed HR managers and about their views of Jewish individuals and their perception of their presence in the workplace. And the findings were staggering. 26% of hiring managers said that they're less likely to move forward with Jewish applicants. And when they were asked why, the top reasons included their perception that, quote, Jews had too much power and control, that was 38% of them, or Jews claim to be the chosen people, 38%, or Jews have too much wealth, 35%. Others, significant numbers, 26% that said they made assumptions about whether or not a candidate was Jewish based on their appearance. 23% said that they wanted fewer Jews in their industry. 17% shockingly said that leadership has told them to not hire Jews. Almost 30% said anti-Semitism is common in the workplace, and 33% said anti-Semitism was acceptable in their company. Those are shocking and awful numbers, and those are the number of people who are admitting that point. There's undoubtedly some additional number of latent anti-Semitism that people are not willing to admit. And other organizations have found similar numbers. The Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, has done some research which they're in the process of working on and announcing, showing that they also found around 25% of HR managers reported anti-Semitism in the workplace and a general bias against individuals who identify themselves as Jews in the workplace. So these are deeply troubling numbers, and in comparison, we typically find the amount of acknowledged discrimination or acknowledged bias in the workplace on something like race, when we're talking about anti-Black racism, to be at substantially lower numbers. There's been obviously lots of training and awareness and cultural discussion about how anti-Black discrimination and racism is abhorrent. I'm sure all of us agree with that. And as a result, we generally see much lower numbers of admitted professed racism in the workplace. So to have that comparison of almost a quarter of HR managers or others in the workplace emitting anti-Semitic bias or perceived anti-Semitic bias from the leadership even is extremely troubling, a major red flag. Now, where did this come from? Is this arising in a vacuum? On the one hand, you could say, well, anti-Semitism is rising across the board in our country, given the number of hate crimes and other reports of anti-Semitism in the public square. And that may be. But I do think that we need to have a hard discussion about how certain types of employment programs have contributed to the sentiment that we're seeing here. For the past 3 years, now almost 4, much of our public discourse has been intensely focused on a discussion about race and racism, as well as diversity and equity movement. I think everyone is on the same page when we say that anti-Black racism is wrong and Black Lives Matter and equal opportunity is necessary. Right? This is not a partisan issue. All of those things are not a partisan issue. The question is, how do we deal with these issues? Race, racism, our country's deep scars on these topics, they're all serious topics. They're all worthy of discussion and debate over the solutions. But it should be clear to even a casual observer of the national conversation that until the last 6 months or so, America's cultural elite, including much of corporate America and many of our universities, reached a singular answer on how to deal with this challenging topic. And namely, that answer was that in response to historical, societal, or so-called systemic discrimination, entities and institutions, including both in the employment and the education space, should adopt both trainings that specifically incorporated a particular ideology about how to handle these issues, typically or often incorporating concepts like Ken mentioned of an oppressor or oppressed framework, a victimized framework, things that pull on critical social theories, critical theory, and then separately that they should adopt race-conscious policies and programs to benefit very specific and limited racial and ethnic groups, and to view that lens, again, solely through a very rigid representation and percentage model where everyone must be exactly representative of how they are in any particular community, whether unrelated to someone's qualifications, merit, it's simply a matter of power and representation. Those have direct and clear implications for fomenting anti-Semitism in the workplace. That's how you get 25% of HR managers saying that they are comfortable not moving forward with a Jewish applicant because they perceive them to have too much power or too much control or too much wealth, or that they are overrepresented. We've seen these types of things happen in the college campus. One terrible example of this, a college in Chicago had a flyer and it noted these kinds of disparities, and the perception that these disparities were the result of racism, and they said here's a certain percentage of white men who are represented, and then they say it's actually a Jewish problem, and they say it's even more overrepresented. Anytime you're going to talk about power disparities or overrepresentation, you're immediately jumping right into anti-Semitic tropes that have been around for millennia, and this is just a new version of it. So equity theory incorporated into what previously had been equal opportunity programs to prevent and remedy discrimination against any and all people have now turned into equity theory-focused programs, and that's entirely different. You can be very committed to preventing racism, very committed to preventing discrimination, very committed to promoting equal opportunity, and not adopt an equity-focused lens. So that's, I think, the conversation that needs to be had in that space. Also, just in terms of my expert view of what I see, I would say that these types of equity-focused programs are pretty ubiquitous across corporate America, even down to mid-size and some smaller companies. They've been very, very popular in terms of the types of trainings that incorporate this particular ideology, and in terms of generally pivoting what companies have initially called EEO programs, and then they called them diversity programs, and then they called them diversity and inclusion programs. Now today, the general moniker is diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. So my general encouragement is that employers should be auditing these kinds of programs, to be very thoughtful and very careful to make sure that even if we assume the very best of intent, that they are auditing things to make sure that if they are incorporating an equity-focused lens, a lens that focuses solely on representation, and solely on power disparities, and solely on or significantly on an oppressor or oppressed lens, that they are not directly and very predictably leading to a rise in anti-Semitic viewpoints in their workforce and in their leadership. And they should also be careful to make sure that those types of policies are not directly leading towards intentional discrimination in terms of disparate treatment, right? When you are selecting an employee, if you are saying, sorry, I'm not going to hire any white males, I'm not going to hire any Jewish individuals, I'm not going to hire anyone who doesn't fit one of the preferred racial groups, that's another area in which you can find these types of policies having clear and direct implications in terms of anti-Semitic disparate treatment. So auditing everything is a very good idea. And I think, again, this is not a rejection of any attempts to have equal opportunity related programming or diversity or inclusion programming, but I would seriously counsel employers to be very, very careful about equity focused programming and policies and to carefully audit them. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Commissioner. Elisa Lowe.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. So as we talk about the DEI, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion programs, and how Jewish identity is often either omitted or the way Jews are portrayed and described tends to reinforce, as Commissioner Lucas just said, some of the traditional anti-Semitic stereotypes. I think it's helpful to try to understand the intersection, let's say, between Jewish identity, Israel, and anti-Semitism, because all of that tends to be converging to create the situation that we now have in the DEI programs. So let's start first with trying to understand a little bit about Jewish identity. As Commissioner Lucas said, right, the laws protect Jews on the basis of religion, race, national ethnic origin. It does not matter how observant, right, or what the religious practice of a Jew is. And one of the things that we've seen, and one of the problems, right, is that so many people view Jews as just a religion and actually believe that the only kind of discrimination a Jew might face is discrimination that involves that Jew's religious practice, right? That Jew needs to observe the Sabbath and they're being denied employment opportunities due to their Sabbath observance, for example. But today, and we see it on campus and beyond, the hostility and the harassment and the discrimination that Jews are experiencing targets them not on the basis of their religious practice, that still exists, but it often targets them on the basis of something else that defines their identity as a Jew. If you look at how Jews define themselves, they define themselves as part of a people, not just based on their religious practice. In fact, the overwhelming majority of Jews today are not Sabbath observers. They don't keep a kosher home, right? So how do they define themselves as part of the Jewish people? What does it mean to be part of the Jewish people? Well, the holidays, for example, give us this understanding of how Jews view themselves as having a shared collective memory, a shared collective history, a shared collective ancestry. So for example, we're familiar with Passover or the Passover Seder. That's commemorating the idea that the Jews recognize and believe that they are descendants not only of the forefathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but that they are the descendants of those who were slaves in Egypt at one point, and who were then liberated and wandered in the desert for 40 years. We just finished the holiday of Hanukkah. The Jews believe that they're descended from those Maccabees, from those who were involved in the story of the rededication of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And so for the Jews, their history, their shared history and their shared collective memory is inextricably intertwined with the land of Israel. In fact, according to Jewish tradition, there are not 10, but 613 commandments in the Pentateuch. And those 613 commandments, over half of them actually relate to the life of Jews in the land of Israel, and they can only be fulfilled in the land of Israel. So they not only are commandments or rules that regulate agriculture in the land, but they deal with the court system, the Sanhedrin that was at one point existed in the land of Israel. They talk about the practices in the temple, in the Jewish temple, and how the kingship would run, right? This was all, the idea was that the Jews became a nation, the people of Israel in the land of Israel. The holidays, the Jewish holidays are actually pegged to the agricultural calendar in Israel. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, right, celebrating that Jewish holiday, that holiday's link is to the season in Israel. So for Jews, for centuries, Jews have not only prayed facing Jerusalem, the prayers are actually filled with the idea that one day there would be the ingathering of the exiles, right? The idea that the Jews have been scattered and dispersed around the globe, and one day the Jews will return to their ancestral homeland. So for Jews, the idea of next year in Jerusalem, which is recited at the end of the Passover Seder and on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the holiest day of the year, the idea of this connection to this land, this belief that the Jews have an ancestral history in this land, and that Jews as a people have a right to self-determination in some borders in their ancestral homeland, is for many Jews an integral part of what it means to them to be Jewish. And yet today, and we're seeing it certainly on campuses, but it's spilling beyond campuses and into the workplace as well, this idea of being a Zionist. What is a Zionist? A Zionist is a Jew who believes that Israel has a right to exist, right? A Jew who celebrates this part of their Jewish ancestral ethnic heritage. So for that Jew who feels that connection to Israel and who believes that the Jews need, right, and must have this, this homeland, this safe space for Jews, a place where the calendar, right, the Jewish calendar is the calendar of that country, the national calendar of the country, where kosher food is easily accessible and where people don't have to worry about getting work accommodations on Yom Kippur, right? There should be one place in the world where they have that space, where Jews have that right to self-determination. That for them is a part of their Jewish identity. And yet today they're being told, if that's the kind of Jew you are, that celebrates that ancestral heritage, that part of your Jewish identity we don't view as so acceptable today. We actually think that you actually need to hide, or better yet, shed that part of your Jewish identity. Disavow it. Disavow Israel, and then you're welcome, right? You're welcome to join our spaces. You're welcome to be engaged with us on all of these issues that you might think you feel strongly about, right? Whether it's women's rights or LGBTQ rights or climate change, immigration issues, whatever the issue is, very frequently today, Jews are being told the first thing that you have to do, the litmus test, is agree that Israel has no right to exist. If you agree that Israel has no right to exist, we'll welcome you with open arms. And what happens now in the workplace is that, especially since October 7th, we've seen a rise. There will be those who will engage in rhetoric as well as intimidating conduct. Certainly on campuses, we've seen it actually already elevate to the level of assault. But they will engage in rhetoric that where they are actually targeting, right, and it's being received by Jews as an attack on them based on their identity. But those who are engaging in it are saying, no, This is really just a good faith political debate. And here's right, you're going to deny them their place in society. Well, today, we don't only have individual Jews scattered around the globe. There is a Jewish collective, the Jewish nation state of Israel. And if you understand how anti-Semitism works, then you begin to realize that what's happening is the traditional approach of anti-Semitism that targeted individual Jews is now doing the same to the Jewish collective, to Israel. So if the idea was blame the Jew for the evil or what you see as your misfortune is the Jews' fault, it's the same when it comes to Israel, right? There are those today who will say, today's greatest evils, that racism, apartheid, colonialism, which country in the world is the worst offender when it comes to today's human rights violations? They don't say Iran, they don't say North Korea, they don't say China with the Uyghurs or Russia with Ukraine. No, they say that Jewish state, where all ethnicities, all faiths, right, are all equal under the law, where members of the LGBTQ community have equal rights, right? This country is the country that there are those who will say is the world's worst offender when it comes to human rights today. And then what do they want to do? If the idea of anti-Semitism is let's push the Jews out of acceptable society, that's what they're seeking to do to the one and only Jewish state, right? Israel is the only state that's told it has no right to exist. Erwin Cutler, who recently stepped down as Canada's first special envoy on countering anti-Semitism, put it beautifully. He said, if traditional anti-Semitism sought to deny individual Jews their place in society, this newer form of anti-Semitism is seeking to do the same to the Jewish collective. It seeks to deny the Jewish nation state of Israel its place in the society of nations. That's today's contemporary form of anti-Semitism, and yet most people today still don't recognize that as anti-Semitism. And so what we need, right, is a definition of anti-Semitism. And we have a definition of anti-Semitism, right? Today, the gold standard definition is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. That's a definition that was adopted, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. IRA is an intergovernmental body. There's no other definition that has ever gone through this kind of process, developed by governments around the world and adopted unanimously. At the time, it was 31 governments. Now there are an additional 4 that have also adopted it. But what's key to understanding the IRA definition, I think, is to actually go back and take a look at the definition of anti-Semitism that the United States adopted in 2010. During the Obama administration was actually the first time that the United States ever formally adopted a definition of anti-Semitism. And you can still find this definition on the State Department's website. This was 6 years before the IRA definition. The IRA definition was issued in 2016. In 2010, the State Department issued a definition of anti-Semitism. If you go to the State Department website, in the introductory language, there's a hyperlink there that'll take you to the 2010 definition. But what is important to know about this definition is, first of all, that it is almost word for word identical to the IRA definition. There are a few small changes, but the main difference, and here's a copy, you can actually, it's a PDF version that's also available on the website. The definition itself is identical, and then there are listed examples, just like the IRA definition. The second page of the State Department definition has a heading that says, what is anti-Semitism relative to Israel? That's our question. Right? What is anti-Semitism relative to Israel? And then what it does is it gives 3 headings: demonize Israel, double standard for Israel, and delegitimize Israel. What are those categories? It gives examples. Those examples that are under those categories, you'll find those examples also in the IRA definition. But just to explain quickly, to demonize Israel, according to these examples, is to take those traditional anti-Semitic stereotypes of the Jew as controlling, as powerful, as greedy, as the devil, as the bloodthirsty individual, right? That evil stereotype of the Jew, and instead of applying it to individual Jews, now apply that to Israel as a collective. That's not a constructive conversation or debate about Israel's policies, right? If you're doing that and just demonizing Israel that way, what you're basically saying is Israel is evil. We're not having any conversation. Israel's evil and we've got to get rid of it, right? That is anti-Semitic. If you want to criticize the policies of Israel, I should note that at the very bottom of the 2010 definition, it says, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. And in fact, that language that was at the bottom of the 2010 definition, that exact same language was moved up to close to the top of the IRA definition to emphasize that we are not talking about criticism of Israel like the kind of criticism of policies you'll have people criticizing the policies of the US government or criticizing the policies of any other government. Right? That's not anti-Semitic. 3 months ago, you had half the country in Israel criticizing the policies of the government of Israel. That's not anti-Semitic. What we are talking about is the demonization, right? If you are just going to demonize Israel and the Jewish collective and suggest that it's evil, that's not criticism of its policies, that's anti-Semitic demonization of the Jewish collective. The other is applying a double standard to Israel that's similar to what we see at the United Nations all the time, applying and holding Israel to a higher standard than any other country. And then the delegitimization. Delegitimization of Israel is denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination and denying Israel the right to exist. Where the IRA definition adds and says suggesting Israel is a racist endeavor. In other words, if you are going to promote self-determination for others, and the Palestinians, for example, but you're going to deny the Jewish people their right to self-determination, that's anti-Semitic harassment or discrimination. And so we need to understand then, coming back to, once you understand the distinction, right, then you can come back to the workplace, then you can come back to these programs and begin to realize, oh, now I can see it, right? The greatest challenge our DEI offices, I think, have, and our administrators and our employers have, is being able to recognize the anti-Semitic harassment and marginalization of the Jewish employees that is actually taking place. And they need to be able to call that out and say, wait a minute here. We are all about having a dialogue on these issues. That's fine. You can even have a debate, you can disagree. But what you may not do is disparage or demean or marginalize or shun or harass an individual on the basis of who they are, in this case, as a Jew. And the problem, and I'll let Rory talk to some of the things that employers can do about it, the problem is that our DEI offices, which were designed ostensibly to try to sensitize people to potential harassment and discrimination and bias, are actually, in effect, because of the way they look at the world and refuse to recognize Jewish identity, they're actually fostering and exacerbating the problem by fostering the anti-Semitic stereotypical tropes of who Jews are. And just one last point in a term that I want to throw out there, and we can talk about more, is that what we're seeing systematically here is the erasure of Jewish identity, right? And there is now, Ben Freeman coined a term for this. He calls it erasive anti-Semitism, right? Denying the Jews the ability to even express and this form, right? And celebrate their ancestral heritage, denying that the Jews even have this ancestral history and this connection to the land of Israel. That is also, in and of itself now, a form of anti-Semitism, and the DEI offices are exacerbating that problem rather than helping solve it.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you all here. The Brandeis Center appreciates all of you taking time out of your day to come and hear what we have to say and to think about these ideas and hopefully to take them back in your positions here in the Capitol and try to understand how what we're talking about here and the impact on Jewish employees and Jewish lives are an important part of policymaking here in Washington and in capitals, state capitals and local governments around the country. So as Ken said at the outset, the Brandeis Center is primarily known for its support of Jewish life on college campuses and the role that the center's lawyers have played in helping to shape the understanding of the legal rights that students on college campuses have. We initiated the corporate project, I guess, last year because the same problems and the same issues that the Brandeis Center has seen on college campuses are also present in the workplace. And one of the most significant challenges that we have and that I have in counseling Jewish employees are those that emanate from a company's diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and programs. Now, when we talk about DEI programs, we're really talking about significant sized employers. Bakery down the shop, the bakery shop down the street, the auto body mechanics place up the block. They probably don't have a diversity, equity, inclusion program. They may have an anti-Semitism in the workplace problem. In fact, many of them do. But they don't have a DEI problem. And that is particularly frustrating for us because I want you to think about a Jewish employee in a major corporation that has devoted significant resources, time, talent, corporate bandwidth to the idea of preventing discrimination in the workplace, but excluding from its thinking and its planning its Jewish employees. Now, I didn't want to put up on the screen what I'm looking at on my computer because I don't want to shame a particular employer. But I have, in front of me at least, the DEI page to say that this is a Fortune 100 company doesn't even capture it. It's probably a Fortune 10 company. So imagine being a Jewish employee at this major global corporation and seeing on their DEI page a picture that is supposed to represent the diversity of this major corporation. And in that picture, you see women, you see people of color, you see people someone in a wheelchair. You can see almost every representation of a group or person that has traditionally faced discrimination, marginalization, the buzzword of the day, in the workplace, but no one who is identifiably Jewish. So you might think to yourself, if you're a Jewish employee in that company, where am I? Do we count? And then you look and you see the different organizations within the company that have been set up to support employees of a particular identity, and you see an organization for African American employees, and an organization for LGBTQA employees, and an organization for the disabled, and an organization for Asians, and an organization for Hispanics, and an organization for indigenous employees. And you don't see an organization for you as a Jew. I field calls and emails all the time from Jewish employees who are not just disappointed or unhappy that they're not included in a corporate DEI program, but who are experiencing anti-Semitism in some way, shape, or form, and are frustrated that the lack of inclusion of anti-Semitism in the DEI program is either an actual cause of the anti-Semitism that they're experiencing at work, or at the very least makes them feel as if there's no outlet, there's no place for those Jewish employees to go. Corporations that have, and almost all do at this point, almost every Fortune 500 company has a DEI program of some kind that don't include in their statement of principles, in their mission statement, in the place where they say, hey, this is what we're about, that don't include a reference to anti-Semitism, while at the same time appropriately recognizing anti-Semitism or homophobia or any of the other isms or phobias that plague our society, is doing a terrible disservice to their Jewish employees and are laying a foundation for an anti-Semitism problem that might find them on the wrong end of a Title VII lawsuit or an EEOC complaint. A DEI program that appropriately considers the needs of its Jewish employees and is taking the steps necessary to protect those Jewish employees from anti-Semitism as required by law will start with their mission statement, with their declaration of principles. It will include anti-Semitism training as part of their DEI program. Imagine the frustration of a Jewish employee attending trainings on racism or sex harassment or any of the other areas that employers really do need to educate their workforce, managers and workers, and not seeing one on anti-Semitism. Or if there is an anti-Semitism training, it's limited to the very easy, very straightforward issues of, we have to make sure that our Jewish employees can take off on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. If a male Jewish employee wants to wear a kippah, or a female Jewish employee wants to wear a wig, or if there are certain dietary restrictions that need to be honored or observed, let's make sure that we do that. All well and good. But if you're unwilling as an employer to dive into the issues that Eliza spoke about, the intersection between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, you're going to find yourself in a post-October 7th environment, ill-equipped and unable to address the anti-Semitism concerns of your workforce. It's all well and good where employers they have a Christmas tree, they'll have enough sense to have a Hanukkah menorah. But employers also do many public displays of support for their employees of different identities as part of their DEI programming. Employers cannot be squeamish about recognizing not just Hanukkah, but International Holocaust Remembrance Day, maybe Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel's Independence Day. Employers are, I come back to the word ill-equipped, to fully integrate the needs and concerns of Jewish employees in their DEI programs. And as a result, they are unable to deal with anti-Semitism that manifests itself other than the plain vanilla classic anti-Semitic tropes. And one of the issues that we deal with at the Brandeis Center, which is an ongoing and very problematic problem, is the unwillingness of employers to include their Jewish employees in their employee resource group program. The list that I was reading from before was a list of employee resource groups at XYZ company. These are important programs that help people of a particular identity integrate and assimilate into the workforce, have opportunities for growth and advancement, have a vehicle for collectively advising the corporation of issues of anti-Semitism, in the case of Jews, that the corporation needs to address. And so when corporations refuse to recognize a Jewish employee resource group, perhaps because they have a blanket prohibition against religious affiliations, which Eliza explained is a very, very narrow and crimped view of Jewish identity. It creates a difficulty for Jewish employees to even effectively address the issue of anti-Semitism. The topic this afternoon is titled, if I recall, it's not just colleges. The problems that we see in universities are present and replicated in corporate America. And it's extremely important that as we insist on reforming DEI programs on college campuses, that we recognize that those same problems, those same shortcomings exist in the workplace as well. And I'll leave you with this. It's very, very difficult for employees to escape anti-Semitism that they experience in the workplace. They can't just not take that class. They can't just go into a different dining hall. They are, for all intents and purposes, trapped in an environment where, at best, the DEI program does not give them an outlet to resolve the anti-Semitism issues that they are confronting, and does not give the institution of the organization a mechanism in form of training for resolving those issues, or at worst, are actually propagating anti-Semitism with ideologies about Jewish power and Jewish privilege. So I'm the last speaker, Ken, so let me just thank everyone. I don't know if you want to come up and thank everyone as well, but I believe we have some time for questions for those who have them, but
Thank you, Rory.
Yeah.
Thank you. The House Education and the Workforce Committee has graciously given us another 30 minutes use of the room, but I am cognizant that we're at the 60-minute point here. At least some of us, I can't speak for everybody, but at least some of us are available to continue for answering questions. But I don't want to hold you hostage, especially those of you who might feel awkward. So if, for those of you who are at 60 minutes who need to get back, do so without guilt. And we'll pause now.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll take a moment for those who need to. Thank you. Thank you all for joining.
And so either they think that the law doesn't apply quite as broadly as it does, or they think that they've internalized some viewpoints that I think you see more on the left of progressives, that only certain groups are eligible to take advantage of civil rights laws. Of course, Title VII applies to all people, and there is no oppressed lens or restriction or only particular protected groups. Any discrimination based on race, no matter who is the victim or victimizer, is unlawful under Title VII. Every religion is protected from discrimination, every natural origin or color. So I think we have very even-handed civil rights laws, and that doesn't always translate into employee awareness. So those types of things, I think, result in employees not necessarily understanding their rights.
So the employees who I speak to, there are two issues. One is they have a general awareness that what's happening ain't right, and there probably is a law that protects them, but they're not necessarily aware of it or the process. And does that mean we file a lawsuit? And I explained that we file, you can file a charge. And in fact, with the EEOC, and I believe it's the same with Title VI, we could actually file on their behalf as an organization to preserve their anonymity. And so part of it is counseling employees on the process for vindicating rights that they feel that they do have. But the other part of it is the substance of what are those rights. They know intuitively that, hey, if I need to take off on Yom Kippur, you kind of need to let me do that, right? Or we don't actually counsel very many religious Orthodox employees, in my experience. But they are, it's a revelation when we explain the view of the Brandeis Center, which we think is an accurate view of the law, that they're protected even though they're not religious, that the protections extend not merely to obviously religiously offensive comments like, the Jews killed Christ, but can include expressions that relate to anti-Zionism or other tropes about Jews that are more subtle. Again, it just points to if their employer had an active DEI that had anti-Semitism as an active part of their DEI program, then Jewish employees themselves would benefit from understanding better what their rights are and what kinds of things cross the line from being merely objectionable and inappropriate, as bad as that is, to actually being a violation of their rights as employees.
Last week's hearing on college campuses. How do you respond to an argument that DEI programs are inherently problematic from an EEOC perspective, or that their initial contention, especially regarding equity, presents challenges to equality in the workplace, such that the goal, at least of Jews, if not any group of people who are concerned with their rights in the workplace, should oppose the programs instead of agitate for inclusion therein? How do you respond to that kind of argument?
I'm going to give a quick working response, and then I'll turn it over to the deep thinkers to maybe answer that more fully. For me, as a working lawyer representing clients or potential clients, I am trying to get them what they're entitled to within the framework that exists in their corporation. And none of the Jewish employees that I've counseled, there have been many at this point, for example, who have a problem with it, have a DEI program-related problem, have asked me, how can I abolish this program? What they've asked for is, how do I participate in it as a full and equal employee? That's just me, like, on a working day-to-day basis, trying to serve that potential client's interest.
I'll say that from my position, and I only speak on behalf of myself and not the full commission, because I'm just one of 5 commissioners, but my general encouragement is that DEI programs are very broad, and people conflate those terms, right? Some of them are diversity programs, some of them are inclusion programs, some of them are equity focused policies. They vary tremendously. To say a blanket statement of abolish all DEI only works if you are assuming that always means equity focused. Now, I would say that including the E often does mean that there is an equity component, and I have deep concerns about the prudence of those policies and the legality of many of them. But, I think that it's really important not to talk past each other. No one should be saying that we should erase equal employment related programs. You have a legal obligation to have that kind of program and policy in place. And I think no one is saying that we should eliminate inclusion related programs, provided those are truly inclusive of everyone, right? You don't want to have an exclusion inclusion program. The devil is the details when you're talking about a variety of other programs. So I think that everyone is best served by talking about the specific kinds of applications of the DEI program you're talking about.
No, I agree with that. I'll put it in a slightly different way. Often I find that the supporters of DEI and the opponents of DEI are talking about 2 different things that they both call DEI. And I distinguish between a general and a specific. Supporters of DEI will sometimes say things like, DEI is not new, it's been around for generations. They're referring not to an ideology that really has become dominant in the last few years, and which includes this notion of equitability. They're referring more broadly to the whole set of programs that Commissioner Lucas described, including, in some cases, the anti-discrimination law that protects all of us from various forms of invidious discrimination. Those people who oppose DEI are often speaking of a more specific thing. They're not talking about the whole cluster of efforts to avoid discrimination and to help us work or live or study more respectfully with one another, they're referring to a specific, if widespread, variation that has become quite common. It is my sense personally that there are rather frequent evolutions in the way in which we address anti-discrimination and equality in the workplace and elsewhere. A generation ago, we talked a lot about diversity management. And I think that there are a lot of diversity management programs that did some good in helping people to understand the differences and similarities among people and how talent can be discerned even when it's wrapped differently than ours is. We move from there to DEI. At some point, we'll move to something else. So I think it is useful to understand that there are different things. The Brandeis Center might not take a particular position on, each of those, but I think it's helpful to realize that, as Commissioner Lucas mentioned, very few people oppose sort of the core of it, and those people who do have problems, it's usually an aspect. Any other questions?
I mean, to the extent that DEI fundamentally is code for a particular worldview or ideology, I do think that that's when you could talk about it. But again, even those people, I think, are generally not saying, let's throw out all the civil rights laws, or let's throw out anything that involves inclusion or general cultural awareness. I think it's more effective to talk about specific policies as applied.
Any other questions?
Through IRA came up, and I'm just wondering how you think, I know some businesses and companies have adopted that, obviously some countries have adopted it, how you think the broader adoption or continued adoption of IRA or use of it can, impact this at all. I don't know if anyone else maybe has thoughts as well, but.
Sure. So I think it's very important for us to have a definition, because you cannot begin to try to target the anti-Semitism and address it if you can't recognize it or see it or define it. And in particular, as I said, I think right now in today's climate, the piece of the definition that we need most desperately is to try and understand exactly when, the criticism of Israel crosses the line into anti-Semitism. So those 3 Ds, and as I said, what's useful about the 2010 definition is that it actually pulled out the examples, and those same examples are in the IRA definition. They just don't have those nice convenient headings. So they're all lumped in together, and so people don't focus on it. But I think one of the reasons, quite frankly, that we have a situation today where October 7th was the most deadly day for Jews since the Holocaust, the worst pogrom targeting Jews since the Holocaust. And there are those who say, oh, that wasn't anti-Semitic. That was political. It could be justified. It's legitimate. And the only reason is because we've actually had now for years people who've been insisting that if it has to do with Israel, it's never anti-Semitism. Never, ever, ever anti-Semitism. It's always political. There's always, it's a part of some good faith debate, no matter what we ever say or do if it's related to Israel. And that's just flat out wrong. That's flat out wrong. We have to recognize and understand when that line is crossed. And the best way for us to do that is to have a definition, and the definition that has the most internationally recognized, accepted definition is the IRA definition. And the process that it went through. You have, Ken Marcus has a definition of anti-Semitism. There are hundreds, maybe there are thousands of scholars who have come up with their own definitions of anti-Semitism. But there is no definition that went through this process over years of these international governmental bodies, so these are government representatives in addition to scholars together, working on trying to come up with an internationally accepted definition, because they recognize exactly where we're at today, that anti-Semitism was on the rise, and that we as a world, anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. Anti-Semitism is society's problem, and society needs to understand and confront it, or the world that we live in. We've seen what anti-Semitism does when it rots out and decays the societies where it's allowed to grow and fester. So we have to, right here in America, in order to uphold all those values that we cherish about this country, we have to make sure that these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are addressed, because that's what anti-Semitism is. Anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory, a baseless conspiracy theory that is choosing today to say anything that we don't like, right, whatever we view as negative, it's that Jew's fault. It begins with the Jews, it doesn't end with the Jews. So the definition is so crucially necessary, as we all say, as an educational tool, right? And it's important to recognize that the IRA definition is just that, it's a definition. It doesn't prohibit anything, it doesn't punish anything, it labels it. And so when you talk about the First Amendment, we're going to the First Amendment in this country, right? The First Amendment protects hate speech, right? You can say in this country, you have an absolute right to say some pretty horrible, awful things. You can say racist things, you can say bigoted things, you can say anti-Semitic things. But the First Amendment doesn't protect you if you say those things from being labeled as a racist or a bigot or an anti-Semite. And what's happening here is the people who are opposed to the IRA definition are the people who want to keep spewing the anti-Jew hatred, but they don't want to be labeled. They don't want to be labeled. And they want to be able to say, it's not anti-Semitic, what I've just said, or what I've just done. And we have to be able to label the anti-Semitism so that we can start to address it effectively.
Any other questions?
I have a question. I'm Israeli, and I saw the statistic lately that after October 7, 80% of American adult support Israel. 51% of 18 to 24, they are not supporting even the protest with the Palestinians. How are you dealing with that?
Is that for anyone?
The young generation, that's my concern, because this is the leaders, the future-wise.
Well, it's important to address the cameraman's question, otherwise we end up out of focus.
By the way, it's off record.
He gets to dictate that. So I think you're referring to the Harris-Harvard poll that came out fairly recently. I'm not an expert on surveys. I know that Professor Ilya Soman has questioned the methodology there. Let's assume for purpose of discussion that it's accurate despite Professor Soman's questions. It is a real issue that the group of people who are in colleges seem to have views towards Israel and Jews that are much less sympathetic and more apt to be discriminatory than other generations. And I would say that is one of the most important reasons that we are on the college campus, that it is the primary focus of our work, and that we are there day in and day out, helping students to articulate their concerns, including those that relate to Jewish identity, helping administrators to understand these issues and in ways that resonate with them because they relate not just to education and ethics, but also to their legal responsibility. And it's why we hold them accountable if they tolerate a discriminatory environment of the sort that exacerbates the trends that you're describing.
I'll just add to that. The sad reality is that those statistics are not surprising, because for years now on campuses, the administrators have permitted this students and the campus community to be fed by certain groups a constant diet of anti-Jewish hatred and propaganda, quite frankly. And so what's been happening over the years is that you have had groups that have been priming the campus to believe that Jews, Israelis, and Zionists are equated with evil, that they are the cause and the root cause of not only settler colonialism, but genocide, oppression, mass expulsion, death, whatever the evil is today, it has been blamed on the campuses, on the Israelis, Zionists, and by extension, as we talk about, because this is a key part of Jewish identity, the Jews. And if that is what you are fed over and over and over again, and university administrators never call it out because they're in the name of the First Amendment or permitting these individuals to mask their harassment by alleging that this is some kind of form of legitimate political debate, right? because that's been permitted over and over and over again for these years on the campuses, it doesn't take much for students to begin to absorb that and believe that that's the truth. Where's the counter perspective? Where is the voices saying, wait a minute, what is actually happening on this campus is not a legitimate good faith political debate about the issues. This is not information that's being spewed by groups that want to come to some resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict or find a way to coexistence in that region of the world. This is rhetoric that's being spewed by individuals who actually want to marginalize and push out the Jew. They want to make it unacceptable on campus to be that kind of Jew, to be that Jew who celebrates your ancestral heritage and connection to Israel. That's what's been happening for years on the campus, and the university administrators have not been calling it out, have not been saying, we have zero tolerance for those who are trying to pit one part of our community against the other part of our community. And it's because they've tolerated and allowed it to grow that we see now anti-Semitism spreading across the country and the statistics that you're quoting. It is going to take, right, education of the administrators, but the administrators are going to have to not only try and educate the community, they're going to have to start enforcing their policies and recognizing the harassment and discrimination for what it is and taking concrete steps to address that harassment and discrimination. Right? To say you want to address the policies, we are all about having robust debate on our campus about the issues. But what we will not tolerate is the disparagement or the demeaning or the shunning of a particular community on our campus. That we have zero tolerance for, and that's what they have to do. And, you know, unfortunately, they think, right, when it comes to standing up for any other group on campus, that's viewed as standing up for civil and human rights. But when it comes to standing up for the Jew, the administrators are afraid, oh, I'm going to be making a political statement. I can't pick a side. Nobody's asking the administrators to pick a side in the Arab-Israeli conflict. They're asking them to stand up for the community that's being targeted and harassed and marginalized. And that's what's going to have to happen in order to try and shift the statistics that you're talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you to Commissioner Andrea Lucas and our Brandeis Center speakers. It's been a pleasure seeing all of you. Thank you.